quite important that we as a committee do understand what went wrong with the equipment in terms of calibration, the checking, the whatever. It seems, a multiple organ failure as far as the machinery is concerned. But I think it would be useful to know what happened, because essentially we're also looking at lessons learned. And so we need to be satisfied going forward that provisions have been made to prevent such a recurrence. I thank you very much for coming today. I appreciate that you've had some hard and difficult questions, but that's always going to be the nature of a situation where the residents, council, and everybody have serious concerns about what has happened. And that is the case here. And I note that you've got quite a lot of questions to take away, and we do look forward to having those answers as soon as is practical. Do you wish to make any closing comment?
Thank you. But very briefly, I'm also mindful of time today. Just wanted to again extend my thanks again to give us the opportunity to address the committee, answer the questions, and commit again to take away those that we couldn't cover today and come back to you with a full answer. As I stated earlier, it is an unacceptable situation in communities that the community is still experiencing increased odour levels from the Walleys Quarry landfill, and we do remain committed to securing the long-term sustainable resolution to that. And again, all regulatory options are immediate, and we remain committed to working with all our partners on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. We should have finished 10 minutes ago, and I'm conscious we now need to hear from the Health Security Agency. I would propose two things. Firstly, a 5-minute adjournment or whatever, so people can have comfort. And secondly, I would propose that we aim to conclude by 6 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I'm conscious that everybody is under pressure with the timetable. Councillor Brown has asked to be excused. She'd actually come back from a family holiday specifically to attend this with the knowledge that it would end promptly at 5. I'm then aware that other councillors have got commitments. We are going to start with a 5 minutes, and I've agreed 5 minutes presentation that'll give orientation, and then we'll move immediately to questions. And I have agreed that Councillor Fox-Hewitt can ask the first question as he has to leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to the Committee of Inquiry and the Secretariat for inviting the UK HSA to provide evidence this afternoon. My name is Alec Dobney. I'm the Regional Head of the Environmental Hazards and Emergency Department of UK HSA. And on my right, I have.
Yeah, good afternoon, folks. I'm Kate Spence. I'm Regional Director of the Western Dispatch.
And on my left.
Good afternoon. I'm Maya Sepai. I'm a toxicologist at UK HSA, and it's my team who provide the risk assessments that have been published.
So, as Chair, you've mentioned, I have a short presentation which we've submitted to the inquiry. I'm just going to briefly go through some of the slides within that presentation just to highlight some of the key aspects that UK HSA has both provided as support to this incident over the time, and just to summarise where we are with our risk assessment on the health impact to the local population. So we are absolutely aware and understand that hydrogen sulfide is having an impact on the health of the residents around Walleys Quarry. Residents near to the quarry have experienced a range of symptoms, including headache, nausea, dizziness, watery eyes, stuffy nose, irritated throat, cough or wheeze, sleep problems and stress. I don't have to go through the whole list. I know that you're aware of those symptoms, and these are consistent with the exceedance of the hydrogen sulfide around the edge of annoyance guideline value. So there's two aspects to hydrogen sulfide emitted from the site. That's a short-term exposure related to the odour impact, and that's of long-term concern over low levels of hydrogen sulfide over the period of time since the inception of the incident and one still occurring today. Just to make very clear that more time spent above the guideline value, which the World Health Organization has set for the annoyance of hydrogen sulfide, and the more time above that guideline value, the more we expect that people will experience an impact on their health and their well-being. At hydrogen sulfide concentrations below the WHO odour annoyance guidelines still will mean that they could smell hydrogen sulfide. So just because of the guideline level limited 7 doesn't mean to say that below that level there won't be an impact. People can still smell the hydrogen sulfide. And as I think evidence to the committee has already been provided, that people can become sensitized to the smell of hydrogen sulfide. So therefore different people quite subjectively can be affected at different levels and different concentrations. We've been monitoring around, or the Environment Agency has been monitoring around the land site for a number of years now, and we have data from a range of mobile monitoring trailers as set out in the map above. And since September 2023 through to June, where we are now, this is the data based on the recalibrated and new hydrogen sulfide monitors that has been provided to UK HSA. Over that time period. Prior to that, the committee will be aware that UK HSA has been providing a monthly risk assessment, which has been provided to members of the public. And the data prior to August 2023 has been somewhat null and void as a consequence of the calibration issue subject to on the data due to the problems with the instruments. I'll speak a little bit about the remedy to some of that data a little later in the presentation. There's a number of other parameters that are monitored around the landfill site. These are particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, methane, a range of volatile organic compounds, and these are also compared to guideline values for health. And to date, none of those have breached the exceedant limits. We recognise some of those in non-threshold parameters. So any exposure to them needs to be a concern. We're talking more about the issue of highly useful. According to guideline values, which we've set out in our risk assessment, more detail of those are in our risk assessment. And we would recommend people do refer to that for the detail of those guideline values. But at the moment, we are still concerned with the 30-minute coup over annoyance value on a monthly basis and a weekly basis. And we are looking at the lifetime long-term exposure concentrations, the reference concentration provided by the EPA. We've noted the issues around the calibrated instruments, and Environment Agency this afternoon explained that the reports conducted by Professor Gideon Henderson's Chief Scientific Advisor to the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs has approved the Environment Agency methodology, recasting that data. We will be looking at that data, and we will be reissuing our risk assessment for the August monthly risk assessment as an addendum risk assessment, and that will be published in the next few weeks. As I mentioned before, we are dealing with those short-term issues around handling sulfide. I must emphasise that this is an issue. We're also dealing with long-term concentrations. We can be quite clear about those in our risk assessment for each month that we produce those assessments. And kind of final statement and recommendation is that the UK HSA is aware that some people continue to experience short-term health effects, that the risk for long-term lifetime health cannot be excluded where concentrations are above the US EPA reference concentration value. Currently, that risk is determined to be small, it's likely to be small, but the longer the exposure is above that concentration level, the greater any potential risk will become. And UK HSA strongly recommends that all measures taken to reduce the off-site odours from the landfill site and reduce the health impacts experienced by the local community.
Thank you. Councillor Fox, if you'd like to ask your questions, then I do understand you've got to use.
Thank you very much for indulging that request, Chair. Afternoon. Thanks for staying such a late time. So you may or may not have seen that many people in the community on social media and in the press have stated that they believe the operations is causing a public health emergency. That's a term that many people have used. So the first question is, given that you've stated on page 37 and 15 that as a result of the protracted nature, the averages being above the long-term health-based guidance and the risk to long-term health cannot be excluded, why have you not commissioned a public health study to evaluate the impact of the site on the health of a local community? So the question is, why have you not done that? And the second part of that is, will you commission a study? That's the first question.
Thank you very much for the question, and that's a very good question to ask. I think part of the work that we've been doing over the past 4 years has been to continually collate information from a broad range of sources to understand what that impact is. So Alec has obviously described today some of the information that we've used from the data, from the emissions data, and that gives us that support to the toxicology team to determine what we understand to be the health risks based on toxicological. But we've looked at a whole range of other factors as well. So we do continually, every month, we look at surveillance data. So that's data that comes from both the A&E departments in the area and primary care data. And we're looking to see if there's been anything that looks like there was a difference. And is it apparent that there are differences in attendances? And over the course of this whole period of time that we've been doing that, nothing has particularly stood out to say we are seeing something that is remarkably different here. However, and this goes back into a number of times Dr. Scott raised this point, we have to remember that the time when we were seeing these large surges was also an extremely complex time for health impacts because we were experiencing COVID. And I note Dr. Scott's comments on the Kiel study, and we are awaiting the outcomes of that Kiel study at the moment as well. I am also, though, and the point I really want to state here is, we absolutely know there are health impacts. We have talked about what we would expect to see, but we've also been and talked to the community. We've come up to some of the community engagement events, we've listened to people, and we've collated information from both complaints sources that have shared, but also the county council has been had a symptom tracker available. So again, we were looking at regular reports coming through on that symptom tracker that actually was more interesting. So the symptom tracker did show more reports of symptoms when we saw those peaks in activity. So absolutely tells us what we would expect. People are experiencing short-term health impacts. I'm just going to expand on that a little bit though, in terms of what more could we do. And it is quite complex. I'm coming to mind, probably was very minute on this, but there is no, you can just say, biological marker hydrogen sulfide. There isn't anything that could take blood samples and say, we can monitor individuals to see how much exposure, how much you've got. But actually, hydrogen sulfide clears from the body fairly quickly. So it's very hard to determine a clinical study that would look at what is the impact of hydrogen sulfide. I think it's been important for us to continue to look at this very broad range of factors. And I think we have to acknowledge what Dr. Scott said, and that is no different to our view. We will have experience, and they have told us of experience, short-term health impacts, many of which is, as we've described in our health risk assessment, we would expect to see from exposure to hydrogen sulfide. So let's see if I can go on to add.
Yeah, I could do very briefly. So, as Katie said, there's no biological marker of exposure. So therefore, it's difficult for us to equate individual exposures, internal exposure, to health. Which is what we could do for other chemicals. You can take a blood sample or urine sample, and you can say, yes, you've been exposed to, for example, lead, and then you look at them. For hydrogen sulfide, that's not possible. So then we have to do the proxies, and that would be, understanding, for example, what levels of exposure may cause health effects. And again, for hydrogen sulfide, except for high-level short-term exposures and low-level long-term exposures, we don't have this information in between. So there isn't what we call a dose-response relationship that we could start to look at in more detail. So it is very difficult to make those real causal relationships between a health outcome and an exposure of that health.
Yes, thank you. I mean, clearly, I'm not a really medical professional, or it has to be. But what I would say, in just a brief response to that, is, in my opinion, I think in 10, 15, 20 years, this Walleys Quarry issue will be like a post office scandal. We have people that are going to GPs, we have people that are self-medicating, people that are going to pharmacies, we have the baby Matthew and the court case with expert opinion from Dr. Sinner. All of these things are indicating that there is a very, very serious problem and an undercurrent. And I think that it would be very prudent as a body to undertake some kind of take a lead and commission a health study to investigate that going forward, because I do firmly believe that in years to come that will be the case. The second question is, in regards to your report, given that you can't exclude the risk to long-term health, do you think that the recommendation that is throughout, just referring you to, therefore, the agency strongly recommends that all measures be taken to reduce the off-site odours from the landfill site. I appreciate this. Don't want to come across too critical one. that would strike me as being a normal recommendation. Of course, we would expect and encourage a site to reduce odours and health impacts. Do you think that given the level of complaints and the level of opinions that we're having from consultant specialists in Alder Hey, local GPs, the people on the ground you're speaking to, do you think that that's suitably robust and strong enough in terms of a recommendation? Because it does seem pretty par for the course, if you'll excuse the expression.
Yeah, so I'll kick off on that one and nothing different not to make. And so what I would say is that we have long been urging for there to be action, because I think the key to this is all about, and I think it was one of the councillors has already made this really important point, treating the symptoms is actually not going to get us anywhere in the long term. So fundamentally, our advice has to be about sorting the cause. And that is where the real activity and the real focus of resources and attention has to be. It is unacceptable that we are in this position still 4 years on. And I think there was comments made earlier about the exceptionality, I'm going to say, of this landfill, and I would concur with that. I would say that our experience of working on environmental hazards, and we have never observed a landfill that has behaved in this way, or where we have seen this continued peaks and troughs of it over this period of time. And I don't know what's going on with this, but our normal advice would be given, and in a relatively short space of time, we would find the situation is resolved in the landfill. So that actually wouldn't be something normal that we would be saying. We would normally be able to give clear advice, mainly on what precautions people can take, and information would be given to the local contractors and providers, and it would be resolved. So this is a very unusual situation. And appreciate the wording might not come across as strongly as perhaps people would like to see, but we have ramped that up considerably over a period of time and raised our and wording of the strength of working. I think it's also just to make the point that when we saw what was happening and what was emerging in 2021, and it was our view to the case that this needed to be escalated into a strategic coordinating group level response. But all partners needed to come to the table, because we absolutely do accept that this has to be all partners running to it. I would agree with the local MP absolutely in that regard. And so, except that might not look like it looks like a normal response. That is much stronger than we would normally say, but in part that's because we have never seen this continual issue that has gone on for such a length of time. So I think take on board the comments, absolutely have to take that away and reflect on it. But it's just important to know where we're coming from.
Yeah, thank you. So I totally understand what you're saying, but you also have to look at the paragraph above. Not only have we said that we strongly recommend all measures to be taken, but we've also said that the average concentration should fall below this, what we're calling for is the long-term health-based guidance value. And that value is set in a conservative level, so that we're saying the exposure should be drawn below that value. And that's where we bring in our health protection advice. So it's not only saying that we recommend the measures be taken to reduce the odour, but that they should be reduced below that value where we have more confidence that the impact of health will be reduced.
If I could just add to that as well, because I think Councillor Wilden did mention the fact that there's periods where there are peaks of hydrogen sulfide on a daily basis, and one day there's a peak and there's another day where there's a peak. And it's this transient nature. So even if we get below 2 micrograms on a constant basis, if there are still episodes where they're above the odour annoyance value, then the perception of the odour still being present is still there. So it's important that both short-term episodes are dealt with along with long-term chronic exposure. And those short-term peaks can be reduced as well. And we don't expect those to come from action.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Fox, you had the answers to your question?
I have, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll then move on. I think I'll go to Councillor Jones, then Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation, and all of the information you provided has been incredibly useful. Please don't take this as a criticism of you or you as an agency. I'm not entirely sure of where you sit within things and what you can do. But I am hearing a lot of should. And that's not a word I like to hear when that's followed by a statement that follows a statement that says you can no longer rule out the impact that this may have on health. Maybe not in this situation, although you can explain, but say you were dealing with another environmental polluter that was causing similar impacts on human health. What's your next step? Because should implies that you have absolutely no route to say must. I would hope that that would say must reduce the levels to below this, because we're talking about something that is impacting on health. How do you go from should to must? Thank you.
I don't disagree on that, actually. I'm just looking at the last wording. I think last time we met with you, we told wording a little bit of conversations with yourselves. And so that last one, which is us stating our recommendation is that all measures be taken. I mean, to me, that is saying all measures should be taken. But just step back one step, which is understanding our role in this. And of course, we don't have any regulatory powers. And we are there to gather the information that we can, take data, and then try and use that to make health risk assessments and advise on the basis of that. And so it isn't a case that we can force any of the organisations, but we absolutely have been saying consistently and have been ramping up our concern and for really over the length of time that this has been going on. And being very clear that our recommendation is all measures should be taken. So what those options are, what those measures are, I understand will be for other regimes to be really clear on implication responsibilities and how that is managed. But from a public health perspective, I think we have to be very clear with that. Always, it's helpful to have that bit. That's what we do.
Thank you, Chair. Just would you reflect on change and should?
Absolutely have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you for this report. A lot of work on this. Thank you very much. That's clear things up. Can I just ask a question so I can get it clear in my head? I've come from very much a lay background medically. If you, as a body, are attacked by a low level of something over a long period of time, and I think one of the things, and I can't remember which of you said it, you said that hydrogen sulfide clears from the body quite quickly. However, my thoughts are, what impact on the body does it leave behind? And if that goes on, sorry, it's two questions, but end up three. If that goes on for a length of time at low level, and then, as Mr. Dockley said, there are spikes when it is greater. In my head, as a layperson, that would cause more harm because it's already impacting on an affected body. That's lay, not medical. My terminology is very basic, but I hope you understand.
Very nice. Thank you very much. I think it's a good question, and it's a valid question I like to answer.
Yes.
So let's start at the beginning. So if you've looked at our risk assessment, I'm sure you have. That's supposed to be doing. When we set a guideline, or in this case, when we accept a guidance value that's been set by another authoritative body. We look at how that guidance value is derived. So the guidance value, the long-term guidance value that we're using just now and asking that the exposure levels be reduced below that level is what we call it's a very conservative value. So we're not looking at a severe health effect because from a public health perspective, we want to be as health protective as possible. So we take, if you like, a less severe endpoint, and if you look at the table that we had also presented, we're looking at lesions of the nose, basically. So these are effects at a low level that we can see, and we're using that to derive our health-based guidance. So I take your point about, if you're then exposed over and over again, what will be the impact? I think it was Katie who said that, hydrogen sulfide is, it goes through the body very quickly. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have a biological marker of exposure, because it just really excretes out. So those low level repeated exposures are, if you have a low level repeated exposure below the guidance value, we don't expect to see a significant impact on health because we've set that guidance value at a very low level. And then, so just make sure I've answered. Then about the spikes. Absolutely. So when you get a spike, we see these short-term health effects, which people are reporting, and this Alex stated. But those short-term exposures and higher level exposures, that the effects should be irreversible. Reversed. So then you then, if the exposure goes away, the health effects also go away. Those immediate acute health effects. So if we're, and as we've stated, that we want the long-term exposures to be reduced to the level where we don't expect to see a risk, that should also be protective of those spikes, as long as those spikes are short-lived. But that's how we do. And then also, if you looked at the previous slides that Alex was presented, we also have a percentage of time where those peaks are allowable without long-term effects on health. Those peaks can't go on for ages because then it's not a peak, it's a high level exposure.
That helps, but could I just ask for some clarification? You talk about levels. I come from sort of industry and corporate background, so I talk about benchmarking. Benchmarking is your best wish list, isn't it? If you achieve this, you're okay. Go plus go, you're okay. Anything below that, you've failed. And what industry norms do is that's the benchmark. I'll try and get above it. I'll try and get better than it because that will then be better. We failed as a zone. We seem to have failed enormously in that area. But I'm still really concerned because if I was looking at an experimental, and I'm going back to sixth one now, I would have a control where there'd been no regular, and I'd look at the impact of a spike against another experiment where there'd been regular exposure plus spikes. And I think, I don't know whether you can do that or whether you thought of that or whether it's a comparison to that. Because I think there's going to be, in my head, a lot of difference from a vulnerable body that's been affected by a long term of years of this stuff, even though it goes out of the body, it's what the residue effect of the cells and so on that's been left behind. To then have a spike that is bound to be a greater impact, I would have thought. Or am I being too basic?
No, I don't feel you're being too basic, but we can't do that experiment because because in spikes and long-term exposure. So we actually have, if you like, two levels. One is that long-term exposure, and then if you look at the table that's there, it is in the animal study, and then we have control groups that are not exposed, and that's how we get those. Okay, that long-term. And so I like the way you put benchmark. Obviously, for us, it's a guidance value. We want to be below it. If we go above it, then we fail. And hence wanting those values to go at or below those 2 micrograms per meter cube, which is the long-term reference concentration. Or if you like benchmark, but for us, it's be below it rather than above.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to ask, what kind of communication have you had with the Environment Agency? Because I know you've been in touch with Campaign of Big Salt about the sort of the long-term exposure, which you can see on the data here, is definitely MF1 and MF9 since September is on averaging above 2. So there's clearly a health risk there for lifetime exposure. Yet on the weekly updates provided by the Environment Agency, they're only publishing the short-term exposure. And we're not getting much information about longer-term exposure. Is that something you've spoken and been in communication to the Environment Agency about? Have you been asking them to publish that longer-term exposure data?
Yes, we're aware of that. That point of note, we just mentioned that we are in conversation with the Environment Agency. We've got to look at the discussions about what data is presented. Obviously, the report we produce every month on a monthly basis has all of the information within that report. And again, I would refer both the committee and members of the public to read risk assessment, because all of the detail, references and all of the data that comes from the Environment Agency, which is quality assured, is in that report. We get to a certain have a conversation with the Environment Agency around what's published on their engagement.
Indeed, thank you, because I think that is crucial information that people keep asking for, yet as to date has not been available in weekly updates that a lot of people see from the Environment Agency. So that point needs reiterating on your behalf, please. Secondly, so we've got the corrected data coming out, I believe, next week, and I don't know if you've had sight of that yet or not, but my question really is, when the new risk assessments come out and the new data that's been corrected comes out, what happens then? Say, I don't want to speculate, but if it has said there is an increased chance that there's a long-term health risk, or it's vastly underestimated your exposure over these 2.5-year periods. What's going to happen then? How are you going to support residents who may have been affected, not just physically as well, but mentally? What's your agency going to do to help support those people who have been subject to these effects?
I pick up on that. I think I'm glad you asked that question, because I think it's really important to understand the multi-agency working that has been going on. And perhaps they haven't had much mention so far, but the Integrated Care Board, the ICB, are really key part of the strategic coordinating group. And we worked with the predecessor, the CCG, at very early days. And I have to say the ICB have been fantastic players in that SCG. So when we had the announcement last autumn that there had been a problem with the previous monitoring data, they worked extremely hard to engage with the local GPs. They set up a helpline. We worked with them to get information to be sent out. And equally, when lots of this first moved back in 2021, our advice to them was, we really think you need to invest in more mental health services. So they commissioned the local health service. So I actually want to pay credit to the ICB's ability to really step up and be flexible and look at when additional services and additional demands might be in place. And so that, there's obviously the question about, what the risk assessment will actually say, and that will be being worked through now. But you're absolutely right to recognise that where there may be a need for additional support, our role is to go and work with those other partners. And the ICB and the Director of Public Health and his team will absolutely be those local partners and the local players that we will be looking to work with. If we feel there is going to be a need for additional support, then we would say that. And equally, if we feel there's information that is useful for them to share with their local NHS partners, then we will do that. So I think it's really important to know that the multi-agency response is absolutely critical to this, so that we are all working together on how we're going to deal with some of those potential changes or things that might arise, not just on this issue, but moving forward in the future. So that's a really key part of what is happening.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for speaking to us this afternoon. Evidence this afternoon given to us by Dr. Scott was that he'd approached his capacity as a GP, both the NHS and either UK HSA or your predecessor body, Public Health England, for advice, and have found that there was really very little that could be given to him in terms of practical advice, and it was all well, whatever cause of it is, treated like a respiratory condition. We're in the middle of a respiratory sickness pandemic, and therefore a lot of the potential remedies that you can apply to that would be the same. We've also heard this afternoon that this has been an extremely exceptional case. The landfill is by far the worst of its kind anywhere, and a huge amount of wheels have been put into motion as a result of that. That being the case, if a GP from other parts of the country was to approach UK HSA today and ask the same question about exposure to landfill gas, could it be possible for you to provide better advice now? And if not, what can be done to make that better? Because one of the things we want to see is that this never happens to anybody else in the future.
Couldn't agree more. So obviously I was aware that that issue got raised on the 23rd of July. And so subsequently I've been back through the files, looking through emails back into PHE, Research Organisation. I did find that there was communication to the ICB or to the CCG, as was then shown the general practice. And I'm going to forward that to you as a committee so that you can see what was sent out back in 2021. And I'm going to contact Dr. Scott as well, because I want to find out if he received it. So that information actually got a detailed letter that was explaining what was being done currently around the site, recognition of the issues that the local community were reporting, acknowledging that primary care was very likely to be having local residents coming to them to report symptoms that may or may not, or they may assume, were linked to hydrogen sulfide and the issues on the site. And there was some clear information there about what was being advised to the community, and then some set of links to reports and sources of information for health practitioners. So reading that letter, I know something more prepared, and I believe it was sent out, and I'm going to find just double check that that did happen, and I will be sharing that with you. I think the point that has also been made though is, one of the things that you're trying to achieve here is that lessons learned. What would we do differently? And probably, if we're all really honest with ourselves, if we went back 4 years in time and thought we were going to be here where we are now, I think we would have really struggled to believe it. I think this has become an incredibly protracted incident, which is the language we would use, and it has gone on a significantly long period of time. So where information had been provided to the community and provided to general practice, and I think we probably do want to evaluate how that has been received, how that has been used. And I think that's something I would take away from today, is to think, what wouldn't we have done differently? Because God forbid we are in this situation again in any other part of the country, but I think there are some really key lessons to be learned here. And particularly with how we are engaging with all the parts and making sure that information is shared and that it is usable and people are able to access what they need. So hopefully that reassures you that something was said, but I'm also not.
Thank you. That is extremely kind of you, and we'll look forward to having a reason of that. Just touching briefly on the slide that happens to be displayed, it's the last one still on the screen. A lot of the research into the impact on health of hydrogen sulfide and natural gas is based on more testing. There are two kinds of research that you can do, and it's been explained to us that we know a little bit about short-term exposure to a large quantity of H2S. We know a little bit about what happens if you expose rats to a low level over a very long period of time. And that's, again, a concern to our residents who have been exposed to that. Is it possible, and you may say it's perfectly fine for the answer we know, is it possible for research to be commissioned that would help us to better understand stochastic or variable exposure to gases of this kind in humans, or indeed in rats, that would be helpful to us in helping the health service to respond to people who report such exposure?
And if it's not, is there anything else that can be done, either in terms of work that you commission as a public health agency, or that you think should be conducted academically that would shed better light in the future? Because I completely understand and appreciate what's been said about this being a particular substance, that there's no biological marker, it enters the body, does harm on its passage through, and is then processed or expelled. So is there any research that you can think of that would be helpful in the future, either as public health research or academic?
Great, thank you. So with regard to the animal testing, so the tests are done on the lifespan of the animal. So then we have to extrapolate to what's the lifetime of the human. So what we do is we add what we call uncertainty factors, so that we're being safer, and basically reducing the potential exposures to a level where we really feel that there's minimal additional risk to infection. But to be absolutely frank, I don't have any further animal experiments that people do. The one thing we have been doing and looking is looking at potential human exposures, obviously not exposure because that's unethical, but to naturally occurring hydrogen sulfide, for example, from geothermal sources, where we might be able to get an understanding of the exposure and then to see what the population has in. So that can, and that is something that we're looking at basically from a literature perspective, not carrying out a new assessment. And the last thing I'd like to say is that, and I can't remember who said it earlier on today, but that UK Health Security Agency is about prevention, and that is one of the reasons why we set these kinds of guidance lines in order to prevent ill health, rather than having experiments where you can see when does ill health start to occur. But yeah, if we could do any kind of research, it's more likely to be desk-based literature reviews.
Thank you. Just to clarify, I'm not agitating for more animal testing or testing on humans by exposing them to geothermal vents like the healthy. Just note that that's where the information is coming from. And if there isn't an opportunity for more research on the desk-based assessments of exposure, including, I think, of our populations of these gases, which I think Keel's study will touch on, then I'm content with everything that can be done.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeldon.
Here I am again. I tend to look at, you call them incidents, I've called them events. So different terminology, same principle. And I always look at pre, during and post. We all know we had happy, smiley lives, breathing clean air pre, Walleys Quarry overcame and starting dumping stuff. We know what's happening during. We're all struggling and suffering. Post, we've got all sorts of aspirations for additional research, for it closing down, but everyone lives happily ever after. One of the things that occurs to me, having once been a smoker, till 1972, sometimes when you've been exposed to something regularly, and I looked at tobacco as an incident, and looking at this, once it stops, there can also be an effect on the body of you've had that toxic whatever in small, rather like homeopathic studies. You've had it over a long period of time. Is there any possibility of once it stops that there will continue to be some sort of fallout, some effect on people once it all stops?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest, but I think again, going back to our advice, if the levels go and stay down below 2 micrograms, then we wouldn't expect an impact, an additional risk on the population, and therefore I wouldn't expect any other side effects from removing the exposure. And that's again one of the reasons why we set a very conservative value to aim for.
Okay.
Because you don't expect to see an effect at that level, and therefore you wouldn't expect to see and any other kind of side effect from removing it. It's very different from, I guess, other kinds of pollutants.
As a follow-up to that, slide 10 of your presentation, which was incredibly useful, you do your risk assessment. If I had someone who'd been affected seriously by this, as a former lawyer, I would look at that and clap my hands with glee, because that would be good supported evidence for a personal injury claim. My only problem with that is that personal injury claims must be brought, financial reward for harm suffered must be brought within 3 years. Because this is dragging out so long, that can affect the ability for people to actually make any sort of serious claim. However, the only thing that I hang on to is dated knowledge, and dated knowledge can only happen once it's been proved that it's had an impact. I have serious concerns about how long this is going on instead of being shelved quickly. If you could wave a magic wand and say, I want to make people live happily ever after in Newcastle under Lyme, would you think that closure of Walleys Quarry was the best thing to happen from a health perspective of the residents? That's just put you on the hot spot now. I make no apologies, I'm sorry.
I was thinking about this because I knew you would ask that. And I clearly, my learned friends in the Environment Agency are much more expert.
Here's your magic wand.
Thank you. In understanding the impacts of a closure. So I don't think closure is an easy option, but clearly it is an option.
Is it the best option?
Well, so this was what I was contemplating, and my colleagues might have a different view, but actually the best option would be what we've seen in every other film that we have worked with, whereas action on site remediates the problem. And this is again where we're no experts, I'm no landfill expert at all, but I think what I have struggled with is to understand why remedial action on site is not bringing this to some form of conclusion, because that is what we have seen elsewhere. So my magic wand would be that works, because I think closure clearly, emotively, that would be what would be a relief to everybody. But I know that it also brings other issues in itself.
But having tried the remedial work, been there, seen it, done that.
But you gave me the magic wand.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my concern actually about all of this, and there's a lot of knowledge not known. I mean, I can remember when we used to do experiments, chemistry experiments at school, when asbestos was safe. I mean, I know it must have been safe because we all had asbestos mats to stand our tripods on. Well, now, of course, knowledge is telling us that asbestos isn't safe. So, I mean, we don't actually know, as you said, that hydrogen sulfide is safe. And I mean, there is this real concern about continued low-level exposure to the substance. And even though it's not leaving a marker, I mean, I'm assuming asbestos didn't leave a marker. And I see it in the same way, to be honest.
Can I just ask, Alex, did you want to say something else in that?
No, I was just going to concur with my colleague that, I mean, that's the only answer we can really give to this. We're an agency that counts that health advice and provide our recommendations. And it's for others to take that on board with all the other evidence to make the right decision based on, for us, there may be an impact on health through the closure of that landfill site as well, and the subsequent intervention, but we would need to understand that too. So what happens to a landfill when you do close it and stop it? There's still a degree of chemical reactivity in that landfill that starts to be dealt with. So understanding that, and its impact is something that we've got to consider too.
I have to say it's totally not my field of expertise. I couldn't comment on it. Except perhaps personally, but it's certainly not something. May I come back to the chairs with regard to asbestos?
Yeah, I just use that as probably a very bad example, but it underlines why I and the rest of the committee are concerned about continued low-level exposure to a substance.
Yeah, so it's a good point, and evidence does change. So I just balked when you said asbestos was safe. We just didn't know it was not safe. It wasn't safe. And therefore your exposures went on at an unacceptable level. With regard to hydrogen sulfide, we have some evidence of effects on animal studies. We know there are effects at very high levels. So we know that hydrogen sulfide does have health risks that go with it. But what we clearly said there, if the levels are at or below the guidance value that we are advocating, then the likelihood of any additional risk to people exposed over a lifetime is minimal. So we're not saying hydrogen sulfide is safe. We know it's not, but we have to manage the exposure.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, thank you. That's just spurred me on a little bit. I mean, I agree with you entirely. Hydrogen sulfide is not safe. It's a poisonous gas. There is a plethora of evidence out there of short-term exposure to high levels of hydrogen sulfide, where those individuals, when attending hospital, have relied upon hyperbaric therapy in order to get just their lung function back. I mean, obviously that's a very acute level exposure and typically comes from exposure within the animal industry, and that's where typical exposure appears from. And I think I was spurred by the chair's question, which actually, there is monitoring for the risk of asbestos. Asbestos workers have to have regular chest x-rays to check for any risk of respiratory aggravation or scarring. And it did make me think that we are dealing with a chemical that is essentially an irritant. Respiratory irritant, it's an irritant within the nasal mucosa, within the respiratory mucosa, and also within the mucosa within the eyes. And there are ways of tackling. We could have nasal swabs. Nasal swabs could be analysed. You wouldn't be able to get your dose response curve, and I fully accept that. But there would be evidence from swabbing that would give some indication of whether inflammatory markers were up, which would then be an evidence base. Obviously, not a robust evidence base, in that you wouldn't be able to generate your dose response curve. But you would be able to say to the residents, I'm not suggesting that you undertake this, and it's something that public health could do. And I recommended this back in 2017, 2018, and was laughed out of the room. Well, I don't think it's been loved out of the room anymore. And actually, we could have been taking swabs and looking for inflammatory markers. Maybe we would have picked up much earlier on. Don't know. Asbestos is the best example. We didn't know asbestos was bad until people started dying from exposure to asbestos. But if we'd have been doing those chest x-rays at a much earlier point, we would have known. And similarly, and this isn't a dig at you. It's simply part of our remit is to accept where opportunities have been missed. And I think that was a big opportunity. We are dealing with a public health emergency. And as we've said, it's very unusual, this situation. And we need to deal with this public health emergency in an unusual way, because it's not a normal public emergency. And I just wonder, maybe that wasn't a question, that was more a statement, possibly mitigated by frustration, but I do wonder if you would be willing to comment on whether you feel that we should be testing, not earth testing, but actual testing to see if there has been increased impacts. Thank you.
Yeah, so I tried to say this earlier, so, but, yeah, so I take a point obviously about inflammatory markers. But there is a level of exposure that would be required to initiate those inflammatory markers. At the low levels of exposure that we're hoping to achieve and stick to, we wouldn't expect to see those inflammatory, especially by taking that nasal swab. So yes and no, I think is the answer. Maybe we could have done, can do that for more acute, short-term, higher level exposures. But I suspect that we wouldn't see any markers for the longer term, low level exposures. And remembering again that we're setting this long term, low level, long term health-based guidance value for a lifetime. So we're not expecting to see an increase in things like the inflammatory marker, because if we were, then that level was too high. We would have to drop that level. So the guidance value is very much health protect. Does that?
It does, but we've had peaks of 500 milligrams, micrograms. I mean, I expect information to be increased under those situations.
Absolutely.
Where we've had these peaks, we haven't had the immediate responses on that, and we've relied too much on potential long-term exposure, not enough on those short-term acute peaks.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yes, I totally agree. There's a short-term peak higher exposure, as I said, we would expect to see it, but residents are already saying that they've got headaches, they've got effects, so we could do that, but I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I'm just trying what would be the added value of doing that. Where we wouldn't see the same thing for a long term, no. Yes, you would see that markers and short for acute high level exposure. Iron levels.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll have one final question from Councillor Wheeldon, and then I think we really must draw the session to a close.
And nice to have the last word again. It's not so much a question as an observation. I hope you'll allow me to use your stint to make such an observation. Thank you. Someone, and I can't remember who it was on the committee here, raised the comparative example of the incidents that happened with the post office and all the dire things that were happening, and people noticed other agencies, not health agencies, but people like yourselves who could potentially have an impact, and the Environment Agency and so on. And it took several dire events happen before someone actually went, there's a serious problem here. I think we're getting to the stage now where people are recognising there is a serious problem here. Your evidence has proved and helped us prove that there is a serious problem here. What happens now is we don't want another post office event, situation, incident. We want that recognition to take place before anything very serious happens. And not just individuals, but our whole community of Newcastle under Lyme would be affected by the fallout, rather like the post office industry has been. And I just hope that people like the Environment Agency take on board what you said and what we've all said here, and they make sure that they act before this dire event has a possibility of taking place so that we're not history repeating itself. Thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wigan. And actually, I think you were quoting me because earlier in the year, I did, in full council, ask the question, and I think it went along the lines of, would the leader agree with me that the Walleys Quarry situation is pure post office? And then the question went on. So thank you for making that point. That was the analogy that we used. And I think obviously, you know, we don't want to see a repeat of that in this situation, but there's been a recent fire that could have had more serious consequences. We just don't know. And almost it becomes an accident just waiting to happen in some form, whether it's this year, next year, or the result of some chemical combinations taking place. We don't know. It needs to be investigated. Would you like to make a final comment?
I would just like to thank you very much for inviting us today, and you've asked us some very insightful questions, so thank you guys. And we absolutely have some things that we will take away and understand further. So as always, it's a pleasure.
Thank you. This session is now closed. I think it's about 6:20. I apologise for the length it's taken, but it was important that members had the opportunity to ask their questions. Thank you to everybody, and I hope the Health Security Agency and others have a good journey home.